Welcome to Shadowed Tales Archive. Tonight, we invite you to descend into darkness with a chilling anthology of horror stories. This is episode 36. Let the nightmare begin. The last gift. I was dying. I knew it. My doctors knew it, and my family knew it. It has only been 16 weeks since my official diagnosis. Yet here I lay, trapped in this generic hospital bed, surrounded by various machines, beeping and wheezing in a haunting melody that has likely been the last lullaby for countless souls before me. I mean, for God's sake, I'm 56 years old. How the hell did it come to this? I was given 100 different reasons why my legs gave out on me before this team of specialists came to a consensus Guillain-Barré syndrome. I was told my immune system was attacking my nervous system, and although potentially treatable, it was not curable. So far in my case, it's been neither. It started with my legs, first attributed to a pinched nerve in my lower back. Over the next several weeks, my breathing became weaker and weaker until I could barely breathe on my own. My arms began to feel like ship anchors weighed them down. Then they didn't feel like anything at all. I should be living the best years of my life. Instead, I'm trapped in a body that 4 months ago was perfectly healthy, now relegated to blinking and tears shed to express an entire range of words and emotions. At this point, the doctors do nothing but tell me to think positive, if not to aid in my recovery, then at the very least for the sake of my family. I know they're right, but at the same time, the timing of it all could not be any worse. I was able to comfortably retire in the spring, and my youngest had left home the month after, joining our daughter in San Francisco to work for some internet startup. That just left my wife and I to travel the world, just as we had talked about since our first moments as husband and wife. God, Emily, I'm so sorry. I can't help but feel like I've let her down. We sacrificed so much time for each other for the sake of our kids and an early retirement, assuming we would have all the time in the world for ourselves down the road. Well, down the road came and went, and here we are. To her credit, she's been nothing short of amazing. She's always been quite literally my better half, and it showed most recently more than ever. This whole process has been just as devastating for her, if not more so, and yet up until now, she's been the only source of positivity between us. Now though, even she seems to be nearing the realization that she may end up leaving this hospital alone. As these thoughts enter my mind, my eyes well up with tears. As my eyes meet hers, I notice they begin to glisten as well. They are an incredible shade of blue, like looking into the deep of the ocean from the window of an airplane. I could stare into them forever, and it breaks my heart to think that for me, forever isn't that long at all. After a few seconds that graciously seemed more like hours, I break her gaze as the door to my room opens and another doctor makes his way in. I hadn't seen this doctor before. I wasn't all that surprised or concerned. A lot of them have been in and out, giving their useless input and expertise on my condition. I watched him as he calmly walked across the room, around to the bed, and to the seat right beside my wife. She didn't seem to pay him any attention. I didn't want to either. I was tired of these people coming in, experimenting with new treatments that did nothing but fuel my frustration as this disease continued to rip me from my life and from Emily. I could tell she was still looking at me, finally letting her pent-up emotions get the better of her as tears streamed down her face like condensation and her smile became hidden behind tightly pursed lips. I wanted so desperately to squeeze her hand, to look at her and tell her everything was okay, but I wasn't able to, just as I wasn't able to take my eyes off of my new doctor as he took a seat next to her. He was wearing a typical white robe and looked to be wearing a nice black suit underneath. He was probably a research director or some other head high up on the pay scale. His face was devoid of any emotion, and it didn't appear as if he had any intention of speaking to either of us. He was holding his hands out in front of him, the same way someone would hold a candle at a vigil. I uncomfortably turned my eyes to his hands as he sat unervingly still. I didn't know what this man was doing, and it seemed that although Emily didn't acknowledge his presence, She had grown increasingly upset since the moment he entered the room. I was furious. He had taken away the only source of positive energy I had, and I just wanted him to leave us in peace. As the curiosity in my stare turned into menace, he reached his hands in front of my wife and placed a small black box between us. It didn't look like a jewelry box, nor did it appear it could even be opened. It was just a cube, black in its purest form. It was dark enough to appear as if it was an absence of space rather than an object sitting on my bedside, like a broken pixel on a computer screen. I looked from the box to my wife, expecting her to be inquiring to this man about the box, or even of his presence in general, but she still had yet to look away from me. If she was so upset, why hasn't she asked this man to leave? I would be screaming this man out of the hospital if I could, but all I could do was turn my attention back to the doctor and hope my eye contact was enough to relay the message. As it turned out, he hadn't taken his eyes off me either, his emotionless appearance a perfect contrast to my near unhinged wife. I had no idea what to make of this incredibly strange situation, but before I could even compose a thought about it, the doctor reached for my arm and extended it towards my wife. I was hoping he did so in an effort to comfort her, so she could grab my hand and we could pretend, at least briefly, that things would be okay. However, my wife did not extend her hand in return, and instead my hand fell short of her as the doctor rested it directly on top of the black box. My eyes shut tight like I'd just been shocked by a loose wire, and my heart was racing, pumping faster than it had in months. It was a few seconds before I was able to open my eyes again, and when I did, I was practically blinded by sunlight. When my eyes adjusted, I found I was no longer in my bed, but in a yard. My yard. Well, my parents' yard, I suppose. I was at my childhood home in Indiana, running around like I'd done every day when I was little. Unbelievably, I was able to move again, but I soon realized that my movements were not my own. It seemed so familiar, but it didn't hit me until I began to run towards the garden my mom had in the back of the yard that this was a memory. A very real memory, and one of my first to be exact. It was the first time I was stung by a bee when I was 3 years old. All I could do was watch as it all played out for me. I ran next to all the flowers, stopped at a bright red tulip, right as a busy honeybee was crawling out of it. I knew I would grab the bee with my hand, and it would sting me right in the middle of the palm, causing me to wail in pain as I ran towards the back door and into the waiting arms of my concerned mother. Except that wasn't how it happened. I grabbed the bee, just as I remember, but instead of immediately dropping it, I swung my hand toward my face and threw the bee directly into my mouth. I panicked as the bee hit the back of my throat, and its stinger pierced the lining. I then began to sprint towards the door like I remembered, but instead of making it inside, I fell several steps short as my breaths became strained and my throat began to swell and close. My heart was beating out of my chest as it desperately worked to keep me moving, but soon I was unable to take in any air at all and my vision began to fade. I turned over to see my mother, and the last thing I could make out was the unforgettable look of terror on her face as she grabbed me, her hysterical screaming sounding miles away as darkness enveloped this horrible, distorted memory. My eyes shot open again, and just as I was about to shout to my mother that I was okay, she was gone. I was breathing just fine, and as I regained my bearings, I realized I was off the ground and on a bike. I was in another memory, this time one of my first times trying to ride a bike. My dad was jogging lightly behind me, excitedly urging me to keep going as I had finally set a good pace following several falls in my neighbor's yard. This was such a happy memory, but after that warped nightmare I had just endured, I wanted so badly to turn around to him and scream for his help. Try as I might, I couldn't. Instead, I was laughing along with my father. I was proud of myself for finally getting the hang of it. I continued to pedal faster and faster as my confidence grew, and I began to pull away from my dad. I remember looking back at him with a smile as he told me to stop, because I was approaching an intersection at the end of my block. I had stopped just fine for what I could remember, but for some reason I continued to look back at him to tell him to hurry up and stop me. I didn't know how to use my brakes. I thought I did, but then I began to scream as I reversed my pedaling to no avail, and my hands frantically waved across my handlebars in an attempt to grab the handles. I gave up fast and turned back again to see my dad right behind me, his hands outstretched to within about a foot of the back of my seat. I took my hands off the handlebars to try to reach back to him, but just as I was within inches of his hands, I was violently pushed away as a sickening thud and a high-pitched screech replaced the sounds of my frantic screams. I felt the air shoot out of my body as the front tire of a pickup truck crushed my bike and rolled over the middle of my back. I felt like my eyes were halfway out of my head, and I couldn't feel much of anything. As I once again faded out from this horrible memory, the last thing I saw was my dad lying next to me, arms still outstretched, and blood pouring from his exposed neck as his head rolled slowly a few feet in front of me. Again, my eyes opened. I didn't want them to. I was so afraid to see any more of my life ruined by these twisted variants of my memories. But this new experience began anyway. It was dark, and I was driving rather fast on an empty, winding road. As things progressed, I had a hard time putting together when and where this was. This was the first memory so far that I didn't really, remember. It didn't help that I felt a little disoriented, but I just assigned it to the effects of what I'd already seen during these terrible nightmares. Had I fallen asleep with that doctor there? Did he do something to me? What about Emily? Just as I had thought about her, I heard a laugh coming from the passenger seat of the car. Hers. God, no. Not Emily. Don't do this to me. I couldn't bear to see anything happen to her. I don't give a shit if any of this is real or not. I looked over to see her laughing in the passenger seat, and couldn't help but laugh myself. Hell if I know why. Laughing is the last possible thing I felt like doing, but I did anyway. She looked younger, but still as beautiful as she always has been, and she was dressed up in a costume. She looked like Wonder Woman. As I saw myself, dressed as a Clark Kent/Superman combination, it hit me like a ton of bricks. We were on the way back from a Halloween party back in college. I couldn't picture when this happened because I didn't remember it. I was drunk. For years, the both of us talked about how lucky we were to make it back safely to my apartment that night, and she was mad at me for a week when I told her I was as drunk as she was that night. As our laughter continued back in the car, I dreaded what was yet to happen. I looked over at her again, and I couldn't help but stare. She really was beautiful. I was completely lost in those same blue eyes, to the point that when my car began to veer off the road, I still didn't look away. Even when my head snapped forward and the windshield shattered from the force of the collision with a telephone pole, I kept my eyes on her as her seatbelt snapped and her body propelled forward over the dashboard and straight into that pole. Her body contorted and snapped as the steering wheel cracked the front of my skull wide open. I fell back against my seat as Emily's lifeless body collapsed in a jagged heap next to mine. Her eyes were wide open, still with a look of blissful laughter as a small stream of blood ran slowly between them. As I drifted from consciousness, her piercing blue eyes continued to stare through me. My eyes opened. Of course they did, and they keep opening. Memory after memory went by. Nostalgia and happiness replaced with torturous, morbid misery like all the others. My parachute doesn't open as I'm skydiving during our honeymoon, and I'm forced to watch the ground below envelop me and listen to my body splinter. I wake up again to a late-night run to get my pregnant wife fast food. She had asked me to go a half hour earlier before, and her favorite takeout was surrounded by police by the time I made it. This time, though, she woke me up just in time to be next in line as a man put a bullet in the back of my head before jumping the counter for a few $100s. All of these dreadful phenomena blend together as my memories turn against me and leave me in perpetual agony. As the familiar darkness begins to set in, I almost welcome it as a sweet, yet temporary relief. As I open my eyes, I feel as if my body is finally caught up with all that my mind has been through. Through bleary, tired eyes, I observe my surroundings, trying to piece together what moment in my life is about to be forever ruined. I recognize the flickering halogen light on the ceiling and the persistent sounds of beeping and wheezing machines. My eyes scanned the rest of my hospital room, and I realized they were moving of my own volition. I was back in my bed, and Emily was at my side, just as she'd been all day and many days before. Before I could look at her, I looked at the space on my bed in front of her where that awful box had been. It was gone. Relieved, I looked in my wife's eyes, full of life and love. Through the horror I was forced to experience, thoughts of real happiness began to break through. I spent so long in this hospital bed being so upset with life for taking me so early that I didn't think about what a miracle it was that I made it to this point to begin with. I was raised by loving parents. I was able to meet the woman of my dreams and spend 35 beautiful years with her, raise a wonderful family together. And despite not being able to continue living this wonderful life I felt so thankful for the years that I was given. I was so happy to see Emily again that my eyes began to well up with tears, and hers returned the favor. While we shared this visual embrace, I felt a brief rush of strength. It was my arm. I was so overcome with emotion that I hadn't realized that my once lifeless arm had come up off the hospital bed and extended slowly towards my wife. Tears burst from her eyes, and her lips tightened to keep herself from audibly sobbing as she reached her arm out and took my hand in hers. I thought my tears began to blur my vision, but as the room began to grow darker, I knew that I had finally reached the end. I hated to leave her this way, but as I thought back to the memories the nightmares attempted to ruin and the countless untainted memories I shared with her, I was astounded at how lucky I was. Finally at peace, I closed my eyes as the door to my room opened and a doctor made his way in. I opened my eyes. Whispers of the crimson moon. The thing appeared to shiver slightly. Ethan squinted, trying to get a better view, but he couldn't for the lack of moonlight. Something was rising behind it, like someone else standing up, but it wasn't a person. It was an odd, wide figure, spindly, and only coming up to the taller form's shoulders. After several seconds of the thing standing there, just staring through the darkness at him, he registered that the second shape was a part of the first. Wings? Those couldn't be wings. They appeared tiny from a distance. Besides, people couldn't. Nah, no way. He hadn't had anything to drink, but alcohol wasn't the only factor in hallucinations. Were those wings dripping something? Ryan clapped him on the back. "What you staring at, Ace? Can you see that guy?" Ethan pointed at the dark figure staring at him. "I think there's someone out there. Far away. Just standing there." Ryan just laughed. "I had more to drink than you, man. And that's saying something. I don't see nobody." Ethan managed to smile, even as he watched the feminine figure uncomfortably. Ryan's classic joke. He knew alcohol would never touch Ethan's lips. They both made their way from the entrance of the bar, away from the woods, and back toward the street. Ethan was going to be graduating college soon. Only community college. His grades, he knew, would drop dead if he tried to go farther than that. He felt like he'd pushed his luck far enough in life already. He hung out with Ryan Keller, a football player for the college's team, the Camden Storm Falcons. Ryan was enthusiastic about football. He even wore his dark purple-gray jersey most of the time, Falcon 01. Sometimes he carried around a small foam football too to toss from hand to hand while he talked. He brought up the Eastern Board boar hogs along the way. You know, man, when you think about it from Animal Planet's perspective, falcons can just dive bomb hogs again and again till they dead. Ain't no way the boar hogs can beat the storm falcons. Ethan absently agreed, but he couldn't get his mind off of what he'd just seen. He and Ryan celebrating a Storm Falcons victory by their brothers over at West Camden Community had come down to the Crow Club for some drinks. Ethan stuck to soda, while Ryan usually downed 2 or 3 strikers before he was satisfied. Ethan couldn't have gotten any alcohol anyway. They'd ID him if he tried to buy it, and he was only 18. But tonight, when Ryan had been ready to head out, right after a bathroom trip, he said Ethan had stepped out front to wait for him. That was when he'd seen the oddly standing figure out behind the building, where the mossy back of it met the woods. It looked like a short-haired boy with his head down, but there was very little moonlight with no stars, so it was hard to tell. He'd slowly raised his head to look at him. He couldn't see the kid's eyes. He stayed back in the trees, staring at Ethan, like the form of death come to meet him as an innocent human being. How wicked. Then came those wing-looking things. He started to wonder if Ryan had actually mixed something in his coke to try to get him to loosen up. But he'd known Ryan for over a year. He was wild about football, but had no bad side. That night, back at the apartment he and his older brother shared, he fell asleep, glad that he hadn't gotten a view of those eyes after all. That would have made sleep impossible, for sure. The next day, after classes, he found Ryan with their usual group. They were all eating from the Bazoo burger inside the cafeteria, cheering about the recent victory for their relative team. This time, Ethan noticed two new people there. Two new girls. As usual, he felt himself tense up slightly. He wasn't comfortable around girls, especially if they were pretty. These girls weren't so drop-dead gorgeous that he'd sink into the floor before getting there. But he knew he'd have a time try to open his mouth. Still, best to try his luck. He'd only had one relationship before, a high school girlfriend who hadn't lasted more than 2 months. It was about time he left the experimental phase. One of them was tall and blonde, and the other one, they must have been friends because they were standing right next to each other and kept glancing at each other when they laughed, was slightly shorter and had light brown hair. The blonde was really chatty. The brown-haired girl didn't seem shy or anything, but she didn't appear to have much to say. Ethan wondered which one had a better chance of showing interest in him. He wasn't much of a talker, so he preferred to listen to other people. Likes didn't attract in that case. Ryan looked up as he approached. Man, if your class let out an hour earlier, we'd get here the same time. Get your short ass on over here, he laughed. Ethan grinned as he approached, feeling better already. Ryan's enthusiasm about everything had a way of being contagious. We got two new girls here, all right? Introductions. Let me do introductions, he continued theatrically, standing and clapping a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Ethan, Chloe. Chloe, Ethan. And little miss doesn't talks a lot over here, would be Lila. He bowed, gesturing between Ethan and Lila. Behind his back, Ethan made the cuckoo sign, and the girls giggled. Those giggles both sounded shy. He realized, man, he was terrible at reading girls. Lila wiped something dark from her eye, making a small black smear. Ethan's eyebrows went up, and she murmured, mascara, with an embarrassed smile. Ethan furrowed his brow. That was odd. He hadn't even noticed her mascara at first. Heck, it still seemed invisible under both eyes. He tore his concentration off of her. While the group talked in scattered twos and threes, he tried making conversation with Chloe. She was interesting right away, but she didn't seem to get really involved in any topic. She jumped from idea to idea, never focusing on one thing for more than a minute. Ethan found it hard to follow along. Soon, though, one of the other guys stole her, and Ethan was actually grateful. He felt kind of bad that he'd left Lila out, because she was keeping to herself. "You're not comfortable around folks?" he started. Hoping it wasn't an embarrassing question, he waited for her response. Now she was shy. "Just sometimes," she said softly. "But Ryan's a hoot." "Yeah, guess I don't need to tell you my name," Ethan teased. He's always got it covered. "I'm new here," Lila continued. "I just met Chloe today, and she's been here 3 semesters. Everyone's been here longer than me, I guess." She frowned a little. Ethan shrugged. "My second year's almost up. People don't usually begin their college in the summer. They take summer vacation from high school to get ready. Did you just get out?" Lila shook her head. "That was last year. My family moved twice. My dad's job used to jump around a lot, but back in January he found a good-rooted position in town, so we'll obviously be staying here from now on. Even still, I'm only 19. Ethan smiled. "I'm 18. Age never does it justice after high school. Still leaves you guessing." Lila blinked. "What do you mean?" "Well, if someone asked you, and you said you were 19, They'd probably assume you'd been here almost a year at least. Shut up, idiot. Lila just smiled. Her eyes, Ethan noticed, were brown. Would you mind sticking by me? She asked in a low voice, as if she thought it was an embarrassing thing to say. I mean, just to show me around a little? You're kind of quiet. I like that. Everyone else is too bubbly. I gotcha, he agreed, nodding. Friend, he reminded his thumping heart. She said friend. Slow down there, Texas. Slow, hey, H-E-Y. Did ya hear me? Easy, fella. There you go. His heart was pumping, though. You won't find anyone like that in the cafe, though, he continued. The library, mostly. But everyone in there studying or something. Right, Lila said. I guess I'll be there a lot, then. She wiped her eye, then grunted softly with frustration and reached for a tissue. Ethan's eyes widened in surprise. He still couldn't see any mascara. That night, he left early. He'd finished his assignments, but the night before had left him a little exhausted. He wanted to sleep in. It was only after he turned out his light that he saw the dark square in the window. He pulled it open and picked up the little thing. It was a note. He turned it over in his hand, flicking on his desk lamp. It was scribbled in dark red pen. Mistakes are okay now. They won't last. Do you understand? Don't be scared. He rolled his eyes. The apartment neighborhood was close to the campus. No doubt someone had sneaked over and planted it there. Just another prank with no planning behind it. Probably some drunk student writing the first stupid thing to come to mind. He fell asleep, but something nagged at his mind. Something about the note that he couldn't understand. There's less moonlight, I won't last. Here it comes. Sunset's fading. Where is he? Did he see? The next morning, when he woke up, he figured out what it was. The thing he hadn't understood before. When he went to his window, he saw a small splotch of red, like a drop of blood, where the note had been. It was really dry. He must have not noticed it last night for the darkness. But the screen was intact, and in fact it was drilled into the wall from the inside. The only way someone could remove it from outside was by breaking through it first. The note and the blood were inside, beyond the screen. So someone had placed a note there from inside his room, not outside. His brother? Hell no. Those jokes weren't like him. But he found himself positively creeped out now. Nevertheless, he had no classes today and enjoyed showing Lila around the campus. She seemed happy as the morning and afternoon wore on, but when the sun crossed the halfway point in the sky, she kept glancing up at it, slowly growing more and more nervous. Ethan kept asking if she was okay, which almost seemed to startle her. But she assured him she just didn't like the dark. He laughed, telling her that it was barely past 1 o'clock, but she seemed deeply troubled. Ethan realized it wasn't that funny and stopped laughing. Just before the sun set, when they were in the library talking, still getting to know each other, Lila's voice dropped some. She started talking a little mysteriously. Ethan couldn't quite understand the change. Suddenly, with worried eyes, she stood up. "Come on," she whispered. She closed her eyes tightly for a moment, then turned around and started to walk toward the nearest exit. "Lila," Ethan called, confused. "Are you okay? Come on," she urged, beckoning desperately. "I don't have much time. I shouldn't have waited." She disappeared through the exit. Ethan followed, eager to keep up with her, but kind of freaked out. At first, when he stepped outside, he didn't see her. The sun was fading quickly. "Lila," he called, confused. Finally, he spotted her, just a dark shape by the trees lining the edge of the field next to the library. She waved to him and backed into the trees. Confused, he ran to her. She was facing away, but she turned toward him. "Ethan," she croaked tearfully. He stared back at her in horror. You didn't see it before. Her eyes were running again, but it wasn't makeup. She was crying dark tears. She was crying blood. Her face slowly turned paler as the seconds ticked by, and her skin seemed to shine. "Ethan," she whispered, sounding so weak, so broken. "Lila," he stuttered. "What happened to you? You were fine just 30 seconds ago." He gestured half-heartedly back to the library. Lila slowly approached him and laid a hand on his arm. It felt wet and sticky. Looking down, He could see her fingers softly stroking down his skin, leaving trails of dark red behind. It was so thin he couldn't see the red, but apparently the stuff on her skin was blood too. She seemed to be bleeding all over, out of every pore. Her hair, it was matted down. It looked almost. "You're the one I saw back at the club a couple nights ago," he cried. "The Crow Club out by." "I know," she whispered. "Lila, what are you?" He continued, talking quickly, terrified. "A demon or something? What does all this mean?" His head was spinning. "You could never understand," she whispered sadly. "What happened to you? I can help. I'm too far gone. The new moon shows who I truly am. Even during the day, I still have to wear makeup to look like I'm still human." The wings slowly rose up behind her, thin and soaked with blood, with ratty, shriveled feathers here and there. They slowly rose and wrapped around Ethan, holding him close to her. "What did this to you?" Ethan cried weakly, but Lila shook her head. "I'd rather not say that, Ethan. There's werewolves, vampires, demons, warlocks, even the devil himself. All the things people know about. But I'm something different entirely. I was like you once, but something changed me into this. If I told you what I was, you'd lose your mind. You could never understand," she repeated sadly, shaking her head at his stuttering protests. "But Lila..." "I'm sorry, Ethan," Lila whimpered. The bloody tears ran freshly down her face. She began to sob. "I would have this any other way, but I don't have a choice anymore." Ethan's stomach turned ice cold with the fear of the unknown. "Have what any other way?" Lila's face crumpled, and she laid her head on his shoulder, sobbing into his neck. "I'm so sorry. I don't understand," he said weakly, feeling the warm blood from her body drip all over him as she embraced him in her arms and wings. He felt her squeeze his hand. "It doesn't take long," she whispered, her voice quivering. "Oh God, I just need to get it over with. I'm so sorry for this." Lila let go of him and stepped back, moving to his side. One of her droopy, bloody wings remained behind his back, and the other one now faced him from the front. The tip of the wing, a scrawny sharp stem, faced his chest. Lila reached forward and gently lifted Ethan's shirt with both hands, pulling it up over his head. "Hey," he protested, turning to face her. But she moved with him, staying at his side. His shirt fell to the ground in front of him. Her wings still faced him in that odd manner, one behind him and one pointing at his chest. That one slowly began to inch toward him. Lila's hands held Ethan gently by the stomach and lower back, as if steadying him. Ethan tried to jerk back, but Lila's grip, even though it was soft, held him effortlessly in place. The wingtip poked his chest, pressing against it. "Whatever you're thinking, ugh," he blurted as the wingtip broke the skin of his chest and entered him. Immediately he froze. Agony ripped through him as the wingtip gently wiggled and worked deeper in him. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't cry. He couldn't scream. He felt the wingtip stab his heart, felt it twist and wiggle gently in the wound it had created, felt the sticky, ratty feathers softly scratching him from the inside as they entered him and shifted about. He tried to bawl, tried to pull away, but he was paralyzed in his standing position with his head turned toward her. Lila's eyes had closed, and she was shaking. Her face revealed the worst of pain, emotionally greater than the physical hell roaring through his chest, and he knew she wished with everything she had that she could stop this torture and let him go. What the fuck was she? Why did she have to do this? "Doesn't take long, doesn't take long, doesn't take long," she whispered over and over. Oh God, I'm sorry. He couldn't utter a sound, even as her other wing poked gently at and then stabbed into his back. He felt it wiggle inside him, tangling itself around his innards. He couldn't even whimper as the sharp ends of the wings stabbed at his organs, scratched them apart, squeezed and crushed them into tiny, shriveled bits. "I'm sorry, so sorry. Her tears kept coming. Her voice was quiet sobs. She couldn't look at what she was doing. So sorry. If he could only ask why. But that wasn't an option. The tips of the wings, like syringes, began sucking the blood from his body, sucking up the destroyed organs, which liquefied in the blood. He could still fully feel every sensation. He wasn't dead yet. She was still squeezing his hand, and he knew she understood. He finally felt a tiny bit of relief as the wing tips began to pull out of him. The pain lessened. His vision blurred. His eyes began to close. He slumped lifelessly in her arms. Lila gasped with fresh sobs as she cradled him against her body. Every new moon. Always someone. Always so unfair. Die. Lila thought of herself. Just fucking die. But she tried suicide numerous times. She was invincible. She had to keep going on. Had to do it every new moon. The only thing worse for Ethan than the torture he had felt would be knowing what she was and why she had to kill him like this. Some things weren't meant for the human mind to process. But then again, Lila's own mind was still as human as she wished she had remained. All of this was pure cruelty. She hugged Ethan's dead body to her, kissed his cheek, and looked up at the sky as fresh tears of blood ran. New blood. Ethan's blood. She uttered an endless roaring howl of grief, of rage, at his agony, at his unfair, tortured death, at her existence. The Faceless Curse. It may be hard to believe for those of us born in the digital age, when every embarrassing moment can potentially be uploaded to YouTube for posterity, but an estimated 70% of all films from the silent era are thought to be lost. Of the silent film directors whose works have largely vanished, perhaps the most intriguing, at least for me, is the German director Erich Murnau, 1887 to 1926. Although influential in his own era, he has since been largely forgotten, for reasons which I believe will become readily apparent if you read further in this article. Murnau was born on September 18, 1887 in Offenbach, Maine, the son of a butcher. He reportedly found the family business very distasteful and did not get along well with his father, who drank heavily. After serving on the Russian front in World War I, a period of Murnau's life which left him permanently traumatized, Murnau married a certain Anna Weiss, a nurse whom he had met at a veterans hospital. He moved with her to her home city of Vienna, Austria, where he began making films for the pioneering producer Joe May. Murnau created many moderately successful films while working for May, several of which survive in whole or in part, but by far his most successful work was the Lord Vanar serial. The Vanar series, based on a series of pulp stories concerning a gentleman thief named Lord Vanar, who goes by the nom de guerre Raffles in the criminal underworld, consists of 6 episodes, each about an hour in length. The films bear a somewhat superficial resemblance to their source material. In the original novels, as in the first 2 episodes of the Vanar serial, Lord Vanar is a somewhat sympathetic Robin Hood-like figure, a la Arsène Lupin, who rarely commits any particularly egregious misdeeds. In Murnau's Vanar serials, however, he became a much more sinister figure, a seemingly omnipotent mastermind of crime who is not above rape and mass murder. In the serial, as in the novels, Lord Vanar is pursued by a Scotland Yard detective named Inspector Harrington. In the early installments of the serial, Harrington is portrayed as a figure of fun, an incompetent drunkard who is always outwitted by the master thief. But in the later episodes, Harrington becomes a tragic figure, an honest lawman who is helpless to prevent the atrocities of his implacable persecutor, Lord Vanar. Although Lord Vanar was played by several different actors, the idea being that his true face was unknown, Inspector Harrington was always played by Murnau's friend and confidant, actor Carl Dietrich. Carl Dietrich became close friends with Murnau shortly after the latter began working with Joe May. The two could not be any more different in appearance or in temperament. Dietrich was healthy, muscular, and a lover of fast cars and boxing, while Murnau was a recluse and often in poor health. Nevertheless, the two shared a close relationship, perhaps finding common ground over the tragedies in their respective pasts. Murnau had had an abusive childhood and was left mentally scarred by his service in World War I, while Dietrich's wife had committed suicide in 1918, leaving him to raise their infant daughter alone. The contents of the first 5 Weinar films, insofar as they can safely be reconstructed at all, only one of them survives, and even then only in an incomplete print, are as follows. 1. Weinar Tritt and Inner Weinar. The screenplay of this first episode was written by none other than legendary director-screenwriter Fritz Lang. In this installment, Weinar, who is living under the assumed name Lord William Aberdeen, manages to steal a valuable painting during an art exhibition. The bumbling Inspector Harrington eventually manages to arrest Weinar, but the latter escapes, switching identities with a guard in a clever ruse. A spectacular chase scene ensues, during which Weinar, of course, escapes. 2. Weinar schlägt zurück. Weinar hits back. The film opens with an elaborate scene where Weinar steals the pearl necklace off of a duchess' neck at the opera house. Shortly thereafter, Weinar boldly announces his next crime via a newspaper advertisement. He will steal the family jewels of Lord Wilmore at such and such an hour. Harrington and his fellow policemen stand guard at Lord Wilmore's side at his mansion, waiting for Weinar to appear, but he never does. Just when he is about to dismiss the incident as a hoax, Harrington hears muffled cries and discovers the real Lord Wilmore bound and gagged in a wardrobe. Weinar had been impersonating him the entire night, and the real jewels had already been replaced with identical duplicates. Harrington realizes that the mansion is rigged to explode and barely escapes with his life. This is the only surviving Weinar film. 3. Weinar in America. Weinar in America. Inspector Harrington receives a tip that Weinar is hiding in the United States. Harrington boards an ocean liner, but halfway across the Atlantic, the voyage begins to go horribly awry. The passengers are falling mysteriously ill. It seems that Weinar has planted plague-infested rats on board, presumably in an attempt to assassinate Harrington. Upon his arrival in New York, Harrington is swiftly arrested for a series of murders that Weinar committed, and a local judge, really Weinar in disguise, sentences him to death by hanging. Harrington makes a desperate escape through the sewer system and emerges into the night air, where he is greeted with the sight of Weinar taunting him from a rooftop. He is wearing his iconic costume, a black cloak, black gloves, and a black executioner's mask. Weinar mockingly crosses and extends his wrists, as if daring Harrington to arrest him. 4. Das tödliche Parfüm, the deadly perfume. Inspector Harrington investigates a series of grisly murders. Someone has been replacing department store perfume with sulfuric acid, resulting in dozens of deaths and disfigurements. In order to uncover the truth, Harrington forms an alliance with a young woman who claims to have been Lord Weinar's lover. Despite being a married man, Harrington soon begins to succumb to her charms as well. The film ends with a shocking scene. Due to the machinations of Weinar, Harrington is forced to allow the young woman to be run over by a train in order to avert an accident that would kill hundreds of people. 5. Die schreiende Leiche, the screaming corpse. Little is known about the contents of this particular film, as contemporary reviews contain little but exclamations of disapproval. It is known to chronicle Harrington's descent into alcoholism and depression after his repeated failures to capture Weinar. The plot reportedly involved a deadly fire at an opera house and a surreal scene wherein Weinar wears a man's flesh as a mask. Despite, or perhaps because of, their often morbid content, the films were quite popular with the contemporary viewing public. One might consider them the Saw of their day. As you might have guessed, the increasing darkness of Murnau's films was accompanied by a corresponding crisis in his personal life. The affair between Murnau's wife, Anna, and his closest friend, Carl Dietrich. Murnau seems to have known of the affair and tacitly accepted it, although eventually, this seems to have taken a considerable toll on his already fragile psyche. In a letter to his cousin, dated October 13th, 1923, Murnau writes, And why shouldn't she prefer him? A man like him can offer her what I, with my frail body and lacerated soul, could never hope to give her. My dark muse has seized control of my life. I am powerless to do anything but obey its commands. This state of affairs continued for some time before an unthinkable tragedy put an end to both the Lord Vanar serial and Murnau's partnership with Dietrich, at least for the time being. In December of 1923, Murnau was away on business in Frankfurt, having left his 18-month-old son alone with his wife. The live-in housekeeper was away visiting her sister. According to the report that a distraught Anna later gave the police, she and Dietrich were making love in the bedroom when suddenly she heard a loud thud from the child's room. Her son had evidently climbed out of his crib, breaking his neck. Naturally, this created a gigantic scandal, and no one was particularly surprised when Anna disappeared one day, presumably to start a new life under an assumed name. As for Dietrich, he emigrated soon thereafter to the United States, where he dropped out of the public eye. Despite the horrendous personal tragedies that had befallen him, Murnau held up as well as could be imagined under the circumstances. Although he had been a doting father, at least when he was not distracted by his filmmaking career, he managed to bear his grief with a certain quiet dignity, even founding his own film company a few months later. Murnau's studio was relatively successful at first, turning out several lucrative, if unremarkable films. A few years after his son's death, however, strange rumors began circulating around Murnau. It was said that he had fired most of his staff and spent his days wandering around his empty, decrepit filmstat. In an interview with the Vossische Zeitung dating to 6 months before his death, Murnau claimed that he had fully forgiven Dietrich and, rather surprisingly, had been corresponding with him and planned for them to make a film together. To the surprise and later dismay of the viewing public, a final installment of the Lord Vanar saga, entitled Vanar's Rake, Vanar's Revenge, was released in 1927. Vanar's Rake was screened in only a few theaters before being permanently withdrawn from circulation. The film, only 40 minutes long, was much more surreal and expressionistic than any previous installment in the series, and much more unsettling. Contemporary accounts, though doubtless exaggerated, mention fainting fits and worse at advanced screenings of the film. According to contemporary newspaper reports, the film begins with an intertitle explaining that Inspector Harrington has lost his job with Scotland Yard and been abandoned by his family. Harrington is shown in a dirty, disordered apartment room, sitting at a writing desk. There is no other furniture around him. Harrington is writing a note whose contents we do not see and weeping all the while. He is surrounded by empty beer bottles, and his appearance is unkempt and disheveled. The crying scene continues for an uncomfortably long time, after which Harrington leaves his apartment and wanders through the streets of London. The city is represented by a series of surreal matte paintings, reportedly very much in the style of Das Cabinet de Dr. Caligari, full of absurd angles that would be impossible in reality. Sinister shapes can be discerned in the background: hanged bodies, weeping, disfigured faces, etc. Inspector Harrington finally pauses in the middle of a tall bridge, contemplating the rough waters and jagged rocks below. It is clear that he is considering suicide. Suddenly, a dark shape materializes at the other end of the bridge. It is Vanar, wearing his usual executioner's hood and cloak. Vanar shouts "jump" via an intertitle, of course, and Harrington, after a moment's pause, manages to gather his resolve and chase after his nemesis. After a brief chase scene, Vanar leaps into an enormous sinkhole, Harrington following close behind. In the next scene, the detective finds himself in an enormous cavern, presumably the master criminal's base of operations. It becomes clear that the cavern is filled with furniture, a dining table with chairs, a wardrobe, a wash basin, even a bookcase. Harrington cautiously approaches the table, soon realizing, to his horror, that all of the furniture appears to be made of human bone. In the center of the cavern is an enormous pile of human body parts, casually stacked together like a compost heap. Harrington recoils in horror and attempts to run back to the entrance of the cavern, but it is too late. Vaynar, with two other masked men on either side of him, is swiftly approaching, carrying an axe. We see their shadows on the wall of the cave encroach on the detectives, finally engulfing it completely. The scene shifts yet again. Inspector Harrington is shown inside a damp dungeon of sorts, his hands and feet manacled to the wall. He is bruised and bloodied. A large metal door swings open and Vaynar reappears, still accompanied by his two masked henchmen. One of said henchmen is carrying a struggling, wriggling form, a blindfolded little girl around 10 years of age. Vaynar tells Harrington, "Now you and your daughter will be reunited, just as you wished." With that, the two masked thugs hold the screaming and kicking little girl down on the ground, while Vaynar withdraws a butcher knife from somewhere within his cloak and calmly, methodically slashes her throat. The two masked henchmen then place the dying little girl opposite the distraught Inspector Harrington. Blood is oozing from her mouth and throat, but she is still breathing slightly. Vaynar declares, "Leave him to his fate," and the three masked men exit the room, leaving Harrington to watch helplessly as his daughter breathes her last. An intertitle announces that 3 weeks have passed, and Harrington is still chained where Lord Vaynar left him. His clothes are ragged, his skin is covered in bruises and blisters, and his eyes have a wild, haunted look. Across from him is the corpse of his daughter, bloated and blackened. The iron door slowly creeps open, and Lord Vaynar reappears, once again shadowed by his two masked accomplices. This time, he is carrying what appears to be a burlap sack. The two henchmen unchain Harrington. He attempts to strangle Vaynar, but in his pathetically weakened state, he is easily restrained. Lord Vaynar slowly pulls an object from the sack. It is a long-haired human head, still dripping blood. "Kiss your wife," Vaynar exclaims. A horrified Harrington refuses, but the henchmen punch him into submission and restrain his arms. Vaynar forces the severed head's lips against Harrington's, the latter retching all the while. Harrington is then returned to his restraints, and the two accomplices proceed to savagely beat him with nail-studded wooden planks while Vaynar looks on. Lord Vaynar motions for his men to stop the beating, and Harrington looks up with dying eyes at his tormentor, lying in a pool of his own blood. "Do you realize now why you've never managed to catch me? Why you could never have one?" Vaynar says. Lord Vaynar begins to peel off his hood and turns around to face the camera directly. We see his true face for the first time, or rather, the space where one should be, for Vaynar does not possess one at all. His face is a blank wall of flesh with nothing at all to mark it as human except a gaping black mouth. "I am lost," he says, drifting closer and closer towards the camera, as if threatening to break through it. Lord Vaynar's jaw opens wider and wider, far wider than should be humanly possible. It reaches almost down to his waist, as if threatening to engulf the audience and all the world. And with that image, the film abruptly ends. As mentioned above, Vaynar's Rake was a resounding failure with audiences at advanced screenings, and it was quickly pulled from most theaters. Evidently, the film was too much, even for a movie-going public that had made Murnau a wealthy man for his earlier forays into aestheticized violence. Audiences had found the film's gore effects to be disturbingly convincing. So convincing, in fact, that many suspected that they were not effects at all, and a warrant was soon issued for Murnau's arrest. After the police had searched in vain for Murnau at his home, a fire was reported at his downtown film studio. Several hours later, Murnau's body, having been pulled from the smoldering ruins of his filmstead, was identified using his fingerprints. Though his garments were badly burned, he appeared to have been dressed in black. The bodies of Karl Dietrich, his 10-year-old daughter, and his former lover Anna Murnau were never recovered. Like most of Murnau's films, Vaynar's rake has vanished almost without a trace. Some copies were lost in fires, an unfortunately very common occurrence, as early film stock was highly flammable, while others were deliberately destroyed. There's an interesting, though almost certainly apocryphal anecdote in Christian Eichium's modern Schauermarchen EUS der Stumpfilmzeit about a rediscovered copy of Vaynar's rake, which bears repeating here, if only for its dramatic interest. In 1974, so the story goes, Martin Kruger, an Austrian film collector, acquired a copy of Vaynar's rake at an auction. After viewing the film on his private projector, he began to experience headaches, nausea, and finally hallucinations. He reported seeing a figure in a black cloak out of the corner of his eye, but the figure would vanish as soon as he turned his head. At first, this figure would appear to be far away, but it seemed to come closer over time. Eventually, Kruger began to suffer from insomnia. The figure would stand over his bed at night, but disappear as soon as the light switch was turned on. Every appearance of this figure would cause a feeling of intense despair and dread in Kruger. After several weeks of agony, Kruger finally burnt the film reel in his fireplace. The hallucinations ended, but an inexplicable smell of charred flesh lingered over the chimney. The same book also offers a rather strange urban legend concerning an alleged curse that hung over the life of Erich Murnau. While serving on the Russian front during World War I, so the story goes, a dying prisoner of Romani descent who had been captured after a particularly bloody skirmish cast the evil eye on the young lieutenant. The weight of the deaths you have caused will follow you like a cloud, the man is reported to have said. Perhaps this was the dark muse Murnau spoke of in his letters. It bears mentioning here that Murnau's sketchbook from his stay at the Veterans Hospital contains numerous line drawings of a faceless, cloaked figure. Regardless of what you think of the supernatural, ask yourself this. Who is more real, Hamlet or Shakespeare, Dickens or Oliver Twist, Charles Foster Kane or Orson Welles? Some fictional characters have more life in them than you or I. The Ashwood Horror. At first, the drinking days were fast, fun, and filled with hilarity. Booze and pot were cheap, and so were musical performances at venues and other places. Parties were easy to find too. Crashers were even welcomed as long as they weren't empty-handed grifters and scrubs. The economy was fine, jobs were aplenty, and none of us had spouses or children back then. In the 90s, we didn't have internet access or smartphones. Not even regular cellular phones. I think a handful of us had pagers. We relied on word of mouth, zines, or flyers for the scoop on social events. It was rare to be all dressed up with no destination on a weekend night in Northern Virginia. We were just a short drive from the nation's capital. Killing the third to last beer of the last 12-pack of ale, Ryan asked, "And what about a strip club?" with an audible slur in his loud, overbearing speech. "Don't you guys want to see some naked chicks?" I rolled my eyes and looked over at Mark, who had a similar reaction. As appealing as the idea sounded, we'd spent the majority of our weekend spending cash already. We had no idea of what was going down that night or where the rest of the gang was. Remember, no cell phones. If you got left behind, that was that. You were stuck at home. If you were lucky, someone would call and let you in on where the action was. We didn't even have enough money for one of our sorry asses to get a lap dance, and Ryan was talking about painting the town red. Ryan, my kid brother, was acting like a moron. But that's how 19-year-olds act when they drink too much. Mark was the same age, but somehow managed to keep his cool better than Ryan. I was 2 years older than the both of them, making me the only one legal to buy booze. We didn't have a clue. What we did have was $26, a Honda Civic with a full tank of gas, and the motivation to keep things rolling. We weren't about to call a night just yet. "Daniel," Mark said to me, "it's 12 o'clock and no one's called. If we leave now, I can get us across the border and at a checkout counter well before 2 o'clock. I'm sure if something's going down, the boys will leave us a message on the answering machine." Mark was right. I don't know how it is now, but back then, any place in Virginia that sold liquor was legally obligated to lock up their booze at midnight. Alcohol sales between midnight and 6 a.m. were strictly prohibited. However, Maryland sold booze until 2 a.m. I can't count how many times we did 90 miles per hour or faster across that Woodrow Wilson Bridge, over the Potomac River, and into the state of Maryland just for 12-pack and some cheap ghetto wine. A fly-by-night, last-minute beer run sounded like it could be enjoyable. Finally, someone was starting to make some sense. I laced up my docs and brought a mag light, in case of road rage. I concealed it in the inside pocket of my bomber jacket and made for the car. Ryan threw on his chucks and his hoodie and grabbed his mag light too. Before we knew it, we were in Mark's Civic jumping on 495, with Baltimore's very own gut instinct blaring through the Kenwood tape deck. Hardcore isn't the same these days. It was both the journey as well as the destination that were both so exhilarating to us. At the end of the line were containers full of that ice-cold, gut-warming, magical elixir that would make us feel woozy and take us God knows where. Drinking was our favorite pastime, followed all too closely by the social deviance that came with it. Vandalism, petty theft, street scuffles, and other forms of criminal mischief paired with public intoxication were always shits and giggles all around. The background music was hardcore punk. We didn't have a care in the world, and fuck you if you weren't one of us. Traffic was dead, a cool night air settled in, and the bridge was in sight. We were almost there. We were making good time, so I made Mark slow down lest we get pulled over. Aside for driving a little drunk, which was easy to talk your way out of back then, we had nothing illegal on us. No drugs, no weapons, no explosives. As long as we didn't speed, we'd be in the clear. Mark knew of a spot, and we took an exit just a few miles into Prince George's County, Maryland. We always made our nighttime Maryland beer runs quick. We stuck together and tried not to draw attention to ourselves. As quiet as we were, people still stared when we entered the liquor store. We said nothing. We grabbed 2 12-packs of Killian's and 3 40-ounce bottles of Crazy Horse malt liquor before making our way to the checkout line. It was while we were in line that Ryan spotted a copy of a local rag with a story about an abandoned hospital vandalized by local youths. It wasn't my first time hearing about the abandoned Glendale Hospital in Bowie, Maryland. I'd been there once with some punks from Richmond. The place was intense. Dozens of vacant, rotting buildings of older architectural style scattered the property with a network of underground tunnels, mostly flooded, connecting the above-ground structures. We got high and played tag that time. As I told Mark and Ryan about it, I could see how stoked they were getting. "How do we get there?" asked Mark. We had booze, motivation, and somewhere to be. I felt optimistic about the evening's improvisational adventure unfolding. The increase in vegetation and further collapse of the hospital wards enhanced the experience. The eerie resemblance to the backdrop of a sci-fi horror film or comic was uncanny and thrilling. We immediately regressed in our delight and played as children on a jungle gym. The mag lights came in handy for their actual intended purpose. After a half hour of running the grounds and scouting the perimeters, we were ready to brave the rusty cages. We entered with caution. The damp air reeked of mold, oxidation, pigeon shit, spray paint, and God knows what else. There were glass shards with bits of Brillo scattered about and freshly spray-painted tags on the walls. We were on land that previous visitors, ones possibly with worse intentions than ours, had claimed. We should have left, but we pressed onward. After half an hour of not coming into contact with other humans, we let our guards down. We found dormitories, labs, a morgue, journals, and magazines. We discovered underground passages that connected above ground structures. Mark almost fell into an empty elevator shaft. We climbed up and onto the roofs of several of the largest buildings. The network of hallways, tunnels, and chambers was amazing. Then the thrill and drunkenness both began to subside. The harsh reality was that our playground was a place where people were quarantined for incurable diseases and left to die. These barren walls and drab colors were the last home they knew before they retired to an early grave. It was a hard thought that led to our decision to go find the Civic and head for the bridge. It really should have been that simple. Leaving the hospital, we heard footsteps, voices, and that unmistakable static-filled feedback on a handheld radio. We ducked out behind an entryway, shut off our mag lights, and kept quiet. We knew exactly how to go about situations like this. No words needed to be exchanged. We all knew what to do. We kept quiet and kept our cool and simply waited for the cops to go away. Those 8 minutes went by as slow as an hour. That's how long 8 minutes seem when you're standing in the pitch black with your kid brother and your friend, not uttering a peep and hoping you won't spend the night in county jail. Following the trail that brought us in, we gradually sneaked our way to the Civic. Thankfully, it had not been discovered and towed by police patrolling the area. Impound fees were beyond our budget, and we were in the middle of nowhere. It was just past 3:30 a.m. We'd had our fill and were ready for bed. Sweaty and smelly, we plopped our soggy asses into the tiny Japanese hatchback. We lit some smokes, cracked some brews, and headed for the bridge. Who would have thought such a poorly planned night could go from being a total bust to being such an event? With the windows down and music on, we made for the freeway, mistakenly convinced that the peak of our adventure was well behind us. We laughed at the patrol trailer on our way out. The fatigue and the alcohol probably had a lot to do with our getting lost. Getting lost was what led to the arguments that followed. Each of us arrogantly proclaimed his own righteousness, insisting that the predicament was surely the fault of the other two parties. It was ridiculous. At some point, Mark pulled over at a truck stop and got directions back to 495. Thanks to the full tank we started out with and the fuel efficiency of his ride, we had plenty of juice to get us back on track. We were so far off the grid, it was pathetic. Once we knew we had the right directions, we apologized to one another and laughed about how far from home we were. Mark got drowsy, but was coherent enough to co-pilot the trip. Ryan was drooling on the back seat with his eyes closed. I took the helm and followed my friend's directions to our home in Fairfax, Virginia. At some point, we ended up on a winding, desolate stretch of freeway. To this day, I cannot remember what route we were on. 2 lanes went one way, and 2 lanes the opposite on a road almost completely devoid of lights save for that provided by the moon and the stars. It was almost 4:30 in the morning. How true it is, as they say, that it is darkest before the dawn. The headlights piercing the pitch black ahead reminded me of our mag lights leading our way through that maze of decay just a few hours prior. What night we'd had! Mark had given me the last of the directions and closed his eyes to pass out. It was many miles, but few turns to get us back to 495, so I took the sole responsibility of our return navigation. As the front, left fender of the car seemingly devoured the dotted lines on the road, I could see the tree lines on either side of the car in my peripheral vision. I glided down the right lane. Ever so gradually, the tree line in my left peripheral vision faded from sight into an abysmal blackness. It was as if someone had draped the left side of the Civic with a giant black curtain blocking out everything to the left of the vehicle from sight. I winced, blinked, and shook my head, attributing it to the onset of extreme fatigue. "Mark, wake the fuck up. Mark!" He groaned some swear words. "Look, dude, I'm nodding the fuck out. You gotta take the wheel." As that last sentence came out of my mouth, I felt my pulse race and my stomach rise to my throat. Although I did not fully comprehend what was happening, I got the undeniable feeling in my gut that something was seriously wrong. The dark mass was quite clearly a large moving object, a vehicle perhaps, with no headlights, marker lights, or tail lights. No lights at all. It mysteriously navigated the twists and turns as effortlessly as if it were daylight out. All the while it kept pace with the Civic, staying dangerously close to our left. "What the hell is it, man? What the fuck?" Mark's sweaty back was pressed against the inside of the front passenger door while he outwardly panicked. He'd awakened to a state of perplexity and terror that exceeded my own. I tried to outrun the dark mass. I got the little hatchback up to 114 miles per hour, and the dark mass didn't skip a beat. When I slammed on my brakes, it slowed down as well. It was almost as if it was an extension of our own vehicle. I couldn't shake him for the life of me. Ryan, by now, was fully awake. Unlike Mark, he was so full of fear he had fallen dead silent. My panic gave way to anger. "Brace yourselves. Hold on to something," I shouted to my two passengers as I attempted to swipe the object. That, too, was of no use as it turned in direct response to the Civic. I shouted and cursed through my open window. Just then a light came on. It was my mag light. Mark was shining it on the object. Once we realized it was, in fact, a big black car, Mark attempted to blind the driver with the mag light to get him to leave us alone. "Take that, motherfucker!" we shouted as we laughed and cheered, pleased with ourselves and our childish antic. When all the lights of our unwanted neighboring vehicle, including the interior dome light, simultaneously came on, our laughter fell silent. The pilot and the passenger of the mammoth-sized, vintage hearse that taunted us mercilessly were virtually identical. Their grotesque appearance forced Mark to retreat with a mag light. The interior dome light of the hearse revealed the silhouette of two large individuals that both looked putrid. I literally mean they looked like animatronic cadavers. They looked as though they could be almost 7 feet tall standing. The driver's hands were so huge they made the steering wheel look small. Between glancing forwards at the road ahead and staring at the ghastly scene beside me, I took in what I could. I tried to tell myself they were wearing masks, but the rancid appearance of their facial flesh matched the necrotic hue and texture of the driver's hands. Both were clad in outdated, formal attire. In spite of the lights on their vehicle being activated, the precision of their navigation was still a mystery. Both figures had their gazes fixed on us, and not the road ahead, while somehow managing to make the necessary maneuvers to avoid a collision. Once again, as a last-ditch effort, Mark aimed the mag light beam at the driver's face to make him go away. Oh my god. Oh my fucking god. I didn't know what had just happened, but Mark was losing his shit. "What is it, man? What happened?" I yelled. Ryan spoke up. "Don't look, Daniel, don't look. Don't speed up, don't slow down, just keep your eyes straight ahead and keep driving." This whole thing sounds so absurd when I talk to people about it nowadays. It truly doesn't do any of the experience any justice at all. We didn't mention the hearse incident for years. On the night of Ryan's bachelor party, Mark and I were somehow able to find humor in the memory, but Ryan was not. The very mention of the incident almost ruined the event. We never brought it up in front of him again. Mark and I too eventually got married and started families. A distance grew between us, but somehow we managed to maintain a friendship. We laugh about the whole thing and decided it was all part of some prank intended to keep us away from the area. It makes things easier for us, but it doesn't explain a lot. Someone once told me that what is seen cannot be unseen. I don't have many regrets in my life, but I regret looking. Ryan was firm when he told me to face forward and keep driving, to not look at the hearse to my left. My curiosity got the better of me. The flashlight revealed unsettling features that I still can't make sense of. Both pilot and passenger were in a total state of decay. Their mouths and eyes, wide open, lacked any sign of human resemblance. The mouths had no teeth or tongues. The eyes were empty, cavernous pits of darkened meat. When I gazed into their faces, I instantly felt an indescribable emptiness wallow up inside of me. It was the lowest low I'd ever felt in my entire life. That's the best way to describe it. The very sight of their faces seemed to draw any kind of positive energy I had inside of me right out. To call the incident traumatic would be a huge understatement. But Mark and I force a laugh when the story comes up. We say it was a hoax, even though it doesn't adequately explain what we experienced. It doesn't even make sense of their speedy getaway. After I saw their faces, we began to approach a stretch of highway lined with streetlights. Once again, I tried to outrun the abominations that followed. I got the Civic up to 120 miles per hour this time, but the hearse began to pass. In fact, it accelerated to such an awesome extent, it dwindled our 120 mile per hour travel speed to a seeming standstill, leaving us as if we were stopped at a traffic light. As it did, so the engine and electronics inexplicably gave out in the Civic, and we began to slow to a stop. As our vehicle decelerated, we could see the hearse continue to race forward up ahead. We watched each street light it passed flicker uncontrollably before completely powering down. Then it vanished from our sight. We still insist on telling ourselves it was a show of sorts, a ploy on the part of locals to keep troublemakers at bay, a way to scare off hooligans and trespassers. It doesn't add up, but it works for us. It makes it easier to sleep at night.
And that was tonight's tale from the Shadowed Tales archive. If it left a mark on your mind, if the silence feels heavier now, then the story did what it was meant to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the darkness. New stories are always on their way. Until then, keep the lights low and the doors locked.